Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce this evening's writers. Forrest Gander's collections include The Trace, Core Samples from the World, and the Pulitzer Prize winning Be With. The recipient of grants from the Library of Congress and the Guggenheim, Howard, Whitting, and the United States Artists Foundation, he taught for many years as the A.K. Seaver Professor of Literary Arts and Comparative Literature at Brown. And he also has a collection here, Be With, as I mentioned, which is available at greenapplebooks.com. Please welcome Forrest Gander. And Henri Cole, here we are. Henri Cole has published 9 previous collections of poetry, including Touch and Pierce the Skin, and a memoir, Orphic Paris. He has received many awards for his work, including the Jackson Poetry Prize, the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, the Rome Prize, the Berlin Prize, the Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize, and the Award of Merit Medal for Poetry from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He teaches at Claremont McKenna College, and his latest collection, Blizzard, is the reason we're here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Henri Cole. Take it away, folks.
Thank you,
Hi. Well, this book, Blizzard, has a big piece of ice on the cover, but it's full of heart and warmth. And I thought I would ask you first just about the form of the poems, Henri. And there's a lot of poems that are sort of shaped in a similar way. And you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Maybe first I'll say that this beautiful cover is from a photograph by a neurologist named Charlie Gross, who passed away a little more than a year ago and was a friend. So it's a pleasure to have his photograph on my book. Many of the poems are what I would call free verse sonnets, which is to say that they are not metered or rhyme, but they have in them the sort of fractures and leaps and resolutions in them that the sonnet form encourages or allows. So the form itself, Forrest, you'll be interested to know, came to me really when I was in my 40s, a year that I lived in Japan. When I was living there, I was trying to think of what kind of poem I would write in Japan, and I was silenced for many months, really. But then I began to think, what is the shortest lyric form? I didn't want to write haikus and tankas, as a tourist poet. And I thought, what is the shortest lyric form that my language has a tradition in? So I tried to then think of bringing some of the qualities of Japanese poetry into those poems were the ones that were in my book Middle Earth, and now that's, I guess, four books ago. So it's a form I have revisited since then, again and again.
One of the nice things about the way that you handle that form is that the resolutions of the poems can be quite different. They're not the sort of predictable gift-wrapped closures. They're very different, the way that you find to exit those forms. And I was excited for those differences. Maybe before I ask the next question, which has to do with how you put the book together, which is a whole different art from writing the poems. Why don't you read a poem from the first section, will you?
Sure. Do you have one in mind?
Well, Weeping Cherry is awfully nice.
Okay, that's a nice one. I haven't read that before. Maybe I should say that I work really hard on my endings. I have a good friend who's a prose writer, and she says that she always knows the ending when she's writing, and she writes to the ending, whereas I find the process of writing is a kind of discovery in which I write to an ending I don't know in advance. I usually have a seed to get me started, and I want the poem, the actual writing process, to be, you know, a kind of, to bring with it a kind of discovery. So I'm aware that the poems kind of, you know, go left and right, you might say, and sometimes seem to end abruptly.
But Henri, so Weeping Cherry is actually in the second section.
Okay, okay. What page do you have? Oh, I have it here.
How about To a Bat? I want to stay in the first section first.
Oh, okay, okay.
Because the bat that has that beautiful, beautiful resolution, and we're talking about resolutions, and
Okay.
and it's emblematic of a lot of what happens in the poems of the first section, I think.
Well, this is one of the skinny poems in the book. It's not one of the sonnet form poems, but I'm drawn to these. I mean, I think if you look at my sentences, they're the same whether or not I'm in a skinny poem or a sonnet. But I like 5-line stanzas. You know from again from Japan, the 5 is well, 4 is, yeah, 4 is not a good number. 4 is death. So a lot of my skinny poems are in these 5-line stanzas. Pulling on leather gloves to pick a groggy bat from above the front door, I put it outside in a hydrangea bush. Where are you going now, Mr. Bat? Can you see your brothers and sisters fluttering over the treetops? Can you see the world is crammed, corrupt, infuriating, shallow, sanctimonious, and insincere? Thank you for afflicting my life. Last night, even the cockroaches looked up. What dat? As you flared around with blind eyes and pure will eculating, ducked under the kitchen table on which 4 eggs huddled in a bowl, I heard chirping, accept and forgive, almost beyond human hearing, and my heart's atria beat faster, almost healing.
Funny and poignant and beautiful.
I'm glad you laughed with what dat. You know, I think humor is, I think humor is so important in life. I'd like to bring a little bit of it into the poems, you know.
Yeah. So the reason that seems emblematic to me of that first section is that there's a lot of happiness in the first section. It seems like, in fact, that the first section begins almost with you making a handshake to the reader and saying who you are. Like in Lingonberry Jam, you say who you are. I am my own master. And in Peeling Potatoes, you're a sturdy middle-aged free man. And in The Face of the Bee, you're a cisgender male metabolizing life into language. And that seemed like a beautiful way of encountering your reader and making a kind of agreement with them about who's speaking in the poems and who they are reading. And then, yeah, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I can say that I think probably one of my strategies is to have an encounter, you know, to have an encounter in nature, and then to be led to some fresh idea about human nature. I mean, I think that is one of my strategies. I have to be a little careful of not repeating it too much, but
you make that nice shift in the bat poem between describing the bat and then speaking to the bat. speaking to us about the bat and then speaking directly to the bat.
Yes. Where are you going now, Mr. Bat? That makes me laugh. It pleases me that it still makes me laugh because it's so silly. You know, it's so utterly silly. I think, how did you put that in a poem? But anyway.
But yeah, you know, sort of maybe that's just what needs to happen for us to save the planet, though, too, is to break down those walls between us and the animal world.
Oh, well, I agree with you. I agree with you. I want to break down also my own seriousness, overly seriousness, to an extent. I want to be able to play with that a little bit.
Yeah, you have a seriousness, but I like that too. And so many of the poems, well, so this first section, so besides the sort of agreement with the reader about who's speaking and this contact and the contact with nature, there's a whole lot of happiness. You know, poems that end or that begin, what a wondrous thing to be suddenly alive, or into a snail. Why do I feel happiness? And like mushrooms, the desire to create desire, peeling potatoes, an abundance of good things, joy in considering your generation, all the beauty of the world, happiness unfolded. This is, of course, before section 2, when we start getting heads on pikes.
Yeah.
But it seemed like I'm really interested in the way that you organize the book that way, because a lot of people who are even really good poets have a lot of trouble making book. And it seems like one kind of genius that you have is in sequencing. So that I'm going to point later to other sort of connections between poems that sort of link them together, even though they're very different. Do you want to talk about sequencing that first section?
Well, I think you're right that I intended it to be more, you know, kind of welcoming and affirming and ratifying. But I think in a way, Forrest, as I approach 65, I feel that, you know, I mean, I think in a way those feelings are in part feelings I didn't have in my 40s and 50s, you know, maybe. And so I think that feeling is in the poems is a record of my own life to an extent. But I did want, that was a, you know, that was a calculation. And the poem, the poems accumulate more gravity as the book proceeds. I'm not really a book project person. I write one poem at a time, and then after maybe 4 or 5 years, I do sit down with everything and I begin to see if there are relationships. And I'm happy if there are, but then I also see that, that the poem, that there might be an ambitious movement that is lacking, or a poem of welcoming into the book. And, it's at that level that I might begin to think about writing to make a manuscript, but that's maybe only in, year 4 or so. I'm sure the book does have a miscellaneous dimension to it because I do write that way, but I hope they're unified by my sensibility, you might say, and by my voice. And I wanted there to be a kind of spiritual tenderness in the book, you might say, even in the most bleakest context. I wanted there is a retrospective quality to the to the manuscript, because some of it looks back to the 80s when I was in New York, or we can talk about that later in the third section, but
yeah. So would you like to go to the second section now and maybe read Weeping Cherry?
Oh, Weeping Cherry, sure.
I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. This poem I wrote, well, I suppose it was really occasioned in part by my mother's death and my thinking about the story of her people. My mother was born in Marseille, France, and the story of the poem is really the story of the Armenian people, her ancestors who came from Asia Minor and escaped death really at the last minute because of the kindness of a ship captain who brought a lot of Armenians to the port of Marseille. My mother spent her whole life trying to be an American woman, and she really became a French woman again at the end of her life, really only speaking French. But I wrote the poem in a way that I wanted to have, it's not particularized in that way in terms of identifying the Armenian people. I wanted it to have a kind of allegorical feel. So the story of these people is the story that is repeated in mankind, you might say. Weeping Cherry. On a plateau with little volcanic mountains, a muddy river, dangerous when the snow melts, a fertile valley, cattle breeders, and a music academy, a tall, handsome, agile people with straight black hair and an enterprising spirit, lived peaceably. Though there had never been hatred between the races, after a quarrel over local matters, massacres came. Men, women, and children robbed and deported. An evacuation, they called it. Heads impaled on branches, mounds of corpses, like grim flowers knotted together. A passing ship transported a few to a distant port where mother was born, though now she too has vanished into the universe, and the cold browns the weeping cherry, vivid red mixed with blue.
That ending is just a killer. It's just so powerful and yet pathetic at the same time. It's, you know, it's shifting away from, you know, the narrative to a kind of emblem of it, and then using browns as a verb before you use the other colors as nouns is
Thank you, Forrest.
Is just amazing. So
I think I had the story first, you know, the sort of, I had the Armenian story in my head, but I wasn't sure how I would bring it to my mother's life, you know, and I found the cherry to be a kind of, I suppose that's a kind of Japanese move, the cherry to be a sort of image in which the feeling can be, you know, the feeling can be represented by the image.
So here's a thing that this sequencing that you do. So this poem,
I see it follows Goya. Yeah.
Right. Both of those poems mention impaled heads.
Yes,
so Goya connects to the weeping cherry through the impaled heads, and then the weeping cherry connects to the next poem, Migrants Devouring Flesh, which is also about migration. And it's, you know, that's a really interesting, so that you have those poems together, and there's almost like a crown of sonnets, this little element that connects one poem, though its subject matter is different, to the previous poem. And this picks up even more throughout the rest of this section too.
That's accidental. I mean, it was conscious when I was putting them together, but they weren't written with that kind of connectivity in mind. I mean, I know the Migrants poem, Migrants Devouring the Flesh of a Dead Horse, related in my mind to the Weeping Cherry, because this poem is actually a description of a photograph that someone showed me. And it's a description of Armenian refugees, starved Armenian refugees eating. And that picture seemed, you know, when I wrote this poem, we were seeing on the television every day pictures of refugees or migrants. Well, we're still experiencing that. But so again, I wrote it not in the particular context of that photograph, but in a way that could seem more contemporary. But it secretively, it connected, or emotionally for me, it did connect to the Weeping Cherry poem, which is probably why I placed it there.
But temporally, you didn't write them around the same, like, you weren't juggling that vocabulary or that theme.
No, I can't say that for sure, but you know, I doubt that I wrote them chronologically in any way at all in the second part. But you know, I think maybe I should say this, that I think of myself as a lyric poet, and for me that means very often I'm presenting a kind of snapshot of myself in a moment of being. But occasionally I do feel the need to look outward and present a snapshot of myself observing, you know, what's happening in the world. And that's sort of my way of being political, you might say, of being public. That's my way of being public.
Well, and maybe political too. This whole second section is very international. There's
there are certainly political poems. I mean, there are poems addressed to Trump. One or two were addressed to Trump, I suppose.
the Super Bloom, the Presidential Lies, or
Yes, yeah.
But then the Dogs and Gazelles, bringing two different realms together. Or there's a poem you title Haiku, and then there's another sequence, the Horsemen, which is almost a little bit of a symbolist poem that's about men at war, and it's followed by a poem called Pheasant, where you say, I don't want to be a gun. And so it connects that way. And then the next poem is Land of Never Ending Holes, where you say those bulbous clouds forming over the small San Gabriel Mountains are greater than any tanks or armored vehicles. So again, they sequence themselves, like, you know, they dovetail.
Yes, well, that pleases me very much, Forrest. Thank you for saying that.
Would you like to read another poem from that second section?
Sure, I can do that. The Horsemen and the Pheasant were poems actually set in Umbria, where this old town still had this battle on horses between, you know, the Saracens.
Oh no, really?
Yes, and that's where this came from. I mean,
Oh,
you know, I mean, it just was a gift to the oversensitive poet. And then at the same time, where I was living, it was hunting season, and the gun, you know, all day there was the sound of these boars being, you know, fired at, and it was, you know, it was scary. Maybe I'll read haiku.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is a poem. I guess it's a public poem. It expresses in a private way a concern for the earth. It's not a haiku, so the title is like a trick title, but it ends with a little, like, miniature haiku.
It's almost more like a haibun.
Hybrid, yes, it is like a haiku. It's like a, yeah, like a poetry hybrid. Haiku. It is, exactly. Um, um, Haiku. After the sewage flowed into the sea and took the oxygen away, the fishes fled, but the jellies didn't mind. They stayed and ate up the food the fishes left behind. I sat on the beach in my red pajamas and listened to the sparkling foam, like feelings being fustigated. Nearby, a crayfish tugged on a string. In the distance, a man waved. Unnatural cycles seemed to be establishing themselves without regard to our lives. Deep inside, I could feel a needle skip. Autumn dark, murmur of the soul, poor humans.
That sweet Buson there. Yeah.
I was remembering when I was reading the poem, I think this poem came out of going in France. I have an elderly friend who's in her mid-90s, and we went to an exhibition at the park in which they talked about, you know, it was about the water and the bay and a lot of these facts came from going to see that exhibition with Claire.
There's a word you use in this poem. I'm trying to remember. So the unnatural cycles seem to be establishing themselves without a regard to our lives. But elsewhere, you use unnatural in a hilarious way to describe, like, you know, something in nature is striking you as unnatural. I don't remember what that poem is now. Do you?
I can't write offhand. No, in this book, it's that way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unnatural cycles. Yes, here it's quite somber. That sounds like a humorous just.
It is. It's a funny moment.
Oh, I know. Is it in the kayaking poem? No, maybe not. With the flies? I'm their amusement. No.
I remember.
That's interesting. Well, now I'll have to figure that out. I won't sleep tonight before I figure that out. No, that's you know, one of our anxieties, isn't it, of repeating ourselves unknowingly, and it's of course an impossible thing not to do, but
as Gertrude Stein says, it's not repetition, it's insistence.
That's perfect. I've got to quote that regularly. Yes.
You read that poem that has that sort of allusion to Buson's haiku at the end. Let me mention some of for the audience, some of the other little allusions to other writers, and maybe you'll comment on one or two that you, in recycling, there's your own sort of lovely version of a Holderlin line. But where the danger is, also grows the saving power. You say, where there is danger, there also grows something to save us.
Someone else pointed that out to me. That's truly unconscious, but I'm not surprised. Someone else pointed that out. Someone else pointed out to me and thought I had taken that from their poem, but I'm glad to know this person took it from Holder.
It's what you do with the line is really beautiful. It's really beautiful. So I thought of Holderlin there, and I thought of Frank O'Hara. He has that Autobiographia Literaria, and here I am, the center of all beauty, writing these poems. And you have that beautiful Paris is my Seroquel, that where I striving to draw nearer to you and to your stones without nervousness or regret, as all the beauty in the world seems to touch. And then that beautiful move you make there where you become a centaur.
Oh,
All the
right, my haunches. Yeah,
seems to touch my haunches and hooves.
yeah, haunches and hooves. Yes, that's right.
And
You
then
know
there's
that.
a reference to Lowell and a reference to Blake and an Emerson quote and Apollinaire and a reference to Charles Reznikov, who quotes a Chinese poet, and you just say the master, about the precision about objects and reticence about feelings. Do you want to say anything about any of those writers? Is Lowell important to you?
Well, I think Lowell is a kind of liberator. I know it's unfashionable to say that now, but I think in terms of post-Freudian autobiographical writing, he is the primary liberator. You know, I don't think of myself as a confessional writer. I think of myself as autobiographical. Um, but I love Lowell, and of course Lowell has book after book of sonnets. Um, Paris is my Seroquel. Nobody knows what Seroquel is, and that's a kind of private story, I suppose, because my mother took Seroquel. Oh,
Seroquel.
I see. Well, that's it. That's interesting. That's great to know. Well, my mother took it, and since my mother, you know, I go to France really mostly since my mother died. I thought that was a kind of private reference in homage to her in a way. I don't know about the others. I forget the others already that you mentioned. I don't doubt that they're all there. I feel like, you know, all the things I read are I'm feeding. I'm like feeding all the time. You know, feeding as a poet, and that's a lifelong, you know, a lifelong process.
Well, then in the third section, again, the mood shifts and the time period shifts. And these are some of the most personal and emotionally affecting poems in the book. Would you read a poem from the third section?
Sure. Let's see, which, maybe I'll read Keep Me.
I think you need to read a couple, and you should read that title poem too.
The title poem, Blizzard, I see. Okay, I can read that.
Read Keep Me too. Read Keep Me.
Okay, I'll read Keep Me first, and then let's see, is Blizzard before that? I should, oh, I already, Keep Me. I found a necktie on the street, a handmade silk tie from an Italian designer. Keep me, it pleaded from the trash. There's probably a story you could tell me of calamity days long ago. Then yesterday, tying a Windsor knot around my neck, I heard voices. Why have you got that old tie on? Suddenly, Mason, Roy, Jimmy, and Miguel were pulling at my arms, like it was the 80s again, a darksome decade with another hard right president. My lips were not yet content with stillness. We were on our way home from a nightclub. I adore you, Miguel moaned, but have to return now. Remember, death ends a life, not a relationship. That's a very sad poem.
And it's a poem that affected me a lot. It really sunk its anchor into my mud. Yeah.
In Blizzard, you know, though in this poem there's a blizzard, you know, a weather event. In giving the book that title, I really just wanted to kind of represent a feeling of like a blizzard of feeling, a deluge of feelings. And that's really why I chose the rush or a deluge of feeling. And that, of course, is the occasion for this poem too. It's a poem set here in this apartment in the middle of winter at 4 a.m. on a cold night. Blizzard. As soon as I am doing nothing, I am not able to do anything. Existing quietly behind lock and key like a cobweb's mesh. It's 4 a.m. The voices of birds do not multiply into a force. The sun does not engross from the east. A fly roams the fingers on my right hand like worms. Somewhere in an empty room, a phone rings. On the street, a bare tree shadows a brownstone. Be precise about objects, but reticent about feelings, the master urged. I need everything within to be livelier. Infatuation, sadism, lust. I remember them, but memory of feeling is not feeling. A parasite is not the meat it lived on.
You know, it's curious. I wonder, have you noticed how often in the collection you use the word meat?
I haven't, but I'm not surprised. Yeah, meat. Uh-huh.
It comes up at least five, six times.
Oh, yes, after grinding meat.
Yeah, grinding
meat. And meat and potatoes. I think we're let's see.
Is meat in the refrigerator locker?
In rice pudding, maybe meat is there too.
It might be there too. There's the slaughtered human body as carrion hanging at the market as meat.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't catch that.
But it has in all these different ways that it's used. And it resonates with heart, which is of course another word that comes up again, meat and heart.
Heart, yeah, the heart, the muscle that, well, I suppose meat, I don't know, that might just be connected to the decrepitude of aging. You know, the decrepitude of aging, but my body gets older for us, but I think my spirit is getting younger.
It seems, yeah. You pull the cheeriness out of the, not a cheeriness, I mean, you talk about wrestling between these two poles, but you keep finding ways, like Sharon Olds does, of being positive about that, of pulling out this graceful gaze at humanity and self and forgiveness.
I feel hope. I feel a lot of hope for mankind. You know, even at this most extreme point of danger, I feel hope. I think maybe more so because you feel it couldn't be too much worse. But that's interesting about meat and heart.
I had another question too, and it involves doves, the early poem. But maybe is it time, Carr, to open up
quarter to? Oh, we should maybe have some questions.
You can ask your question for us. That's no problem.
Well, there's a famous Wallace Stevens Stone's poem called the Snowman, where he plays on nothing and nothingness, and
one must have a mind of winter. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost and the snow gust. Yeah.
The pine trees crusted with snow and have been cold.
Yes. Yeah.
But you have this beautiful line in Doves about where you say, and I was hoping you'd read it and for the audience to listen and for the audience to wonder about what function nothing has there. You say, don't fear nothing. And that could mean don't fear anything or don't
that's
fear
interesting.
nothingness.
Yes.
Do you want to close with that poem?
Sure, that's such an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that, but I really like that. Sometimes when I'm ungrammatical in my poems, I'm remembering things my father would have said. He was so ungrammatical about so many things he would say, but they were wise at the same time. They were wise, ungrammatical things. Doves, gray and white, as if with age, or some preserving of the past, as in Beowulf, our hoary ancestor. Hoary, as in a bat or a willow, or the venerable hoary dove that flew straight into my picture window today, and then lay dead on the front porch. We buried it in some distorted version of its normal self, folded in a white cloth napkin in the backyard, still soft enough to be cut into like a cabbage. I thought, I'm glad I'm not dead. Listen to them now, higher up in the trees, biting and scratching with their unmistakable twitch of life. Don't fear nothing, their twittering voices cry. The true spirit of living isn't eating greedily or reflection or even love, but dissidence like an axe of stone. I'm proud I wrote that poem. Actually, I feel I got it. I said what I wanted to there, you know. I'm in response to your question though, I think I wanted the birds to speak straight, to speak, ungrammatically straight, to say something true. I think that probably the copy editor wanted me to fix that. But.
I'm glad you won that battle. Yeah.
See. Thank you, Forrest, for making me feel so good about this book.
It was such a pleasure to live in it. Yeah. And I'm really grateful you wrote it. It's a book that though you wrote it before this pandemic and, this miserable time, pandemic and this horrible election and California fires, T.D. Wright would say, all we need now is, to lay in a big crop of hemorrhoids. And then
Yes.
It'd be perfect, man.
Yeah.
But the book is wrestling with so much dissidence and so much darkness, and finding ways for us to look at that emotionally, and to feel like we're buoyant enough to get through it because your heart is.
Thank you. I hope that's true.
I hope it's true too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. What a pleasure. So we'll jump into audience questions here. I want to give people a couple of minutes to get their questions in if they haven't. I have a question for you to get things started. I'd love for you to talk about the eponymous poem about Blizzard and how it became the title of the collection and what it embodies as the title of the poem and the collection. I'm really glad you read that one as well.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, there was a lot of discussion as to what I should title the book, and there were people that didn't want me to call it Blizzard. But I always had a sense of rightness about it because of this feeling of just a deluge of emotion, all different kinds of emotions. I wanted a one-word title. I wish I could think of all the other titles. Up until the very last minute, even when it was in a catalog, they thought of switching it out. But I'm really glad I stayed with it.
Let's see, we have a couple of other questions here. Will Buckley asks, Henri, what is it like to be promoting, yeah, I think you know him, promoting a book that was
I'm
probably
trying to place him. I
conceived
think that's a
of...
student, Will Buckley. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's signed your student Will. What is it like to be promoting a book that was probably conceived of and created in a separate paradigm from the COVID-directed one we exist in now?
Well, I can't think of a stranger moment to publish a book. You know, it makes me wonder, well, I guess I feel we live in this moment in which we hear the voice of the radio, the voice of the TV, the voice of the politicians, the voice of the dictator, the voice, all these loud voices. And I think confinement has made me feel a desire to hear one voice, you know, a kind of inner voice, a kind of, I have on my windowsill here a shell. Let me grab it. And I sort of want, you know, I sort of yearn for just this one voice of the shell, you know, in a poem. I think in that sense, the healing power and the survival power of poetry is felt more strongly during this time. Actually, I think the voice of poetry is very often the voice of one person speaking to another person. And that act of connection is deeply consoling. I mean, that's always true, isn't it? But it's foregrounded more in moments like this, I think. Forrest, do you want to speak to that?
I feel the same way. I think of how miraculous it is that in a time of spectacle that we live in, with bombardment of every possible kind, that there is this intimacy we can access all alone with our shell in a room, reading a poem that is a deep and profound intimacy with other people, with someone else. I think it's a miracle, and that's why people keep finding poetry.
Well said, Tiva. Sally Greenhouse asks, are you finding that the presence of the pandemic is exerting an influence on the poems you're making now?
Well, I've only written one poem. I've actually been writing some prose. So I don't know if that's, I was just kind of dead for weeks and months, I felt. You know, when I came here in mid-March, and I was, you know, I just sort of filled my time by caring for myself and cleaning drawers and closets and just doing, you know, small tasks. So it hasn't been a poetry time, but then I slowly began to work on some prose. How about you, Forrest? Have you been able to write?
It's been a time where I've been working on I think that same sort of need to hear someone else, to have that shell. I've been working on translations. So I just finished a book of translations of this wonderful Mexican poet, Coral Bracho. And it's her new book that has to do with her mother's Alzheimer's. And it is just so tender. It's just the tenderness I needed to access at this time.
And then one last question for you both. Who are you reading now? If you are.
What is this?
I'm reading Alice Oswald's new book.
Oh, yeah. I haven't even seen that book. Is that brand new?
It's brand new, and she's just amazing. She's just amazing. But this one's the one to get first.
It's sort of the same colors. The cover is the same palette of colors. It's interesting.
Yeah. You're right.
This prose I've been working on is connected to Elizabeth Bishop. So I've been rereading a lot of material in connection with Bishop. Been reading her letters, and I've been writing a little bit about a teacher I had named David Calstone in graduate school, and he wrote about Bishop. So mostly the things I've been reading are connected to this little prose project I'm doing. But this month there are all these books of poetry coming out. You know, there's 7 or 8. I mean, there's just many books this month. I'm very eager to read. I was glad to see that Carl Phillips is coming to read. I would like to read. I haven't read that new book of his, The Pale Colors in a Field. I'm eager to read that book.
It's very good. Thank you both so much for joining us. This is a pleasure and a privilege, and I'm so glad that we could have you both here, and I'm so glad to all of you out there for joining us this evening. I'll just show you these really beautiful books one more time in case you haven't seen them already, but we have Henri and Forrest's books available at our stores and online. We're happy to ship them to you. Thank you both so much again. It was a delight. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for writing this beautiful book, Henri.
Oh, well, thank you for being with me to celebrate it. And thank you to these participants for coming on a Friday night to share this with me. I'm so grateful. Forrest, please stay in touch, huh?
I will. Okay. All right. Look forward to coming out to California again.
I'm eager to come. I hope we're teaching in person in the spring. I really do. So, see you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations.
Hi, Bo.
Thank you, Carl.
Yes. Congrats. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Carter.